You walk through the marble corridors of the Palace of Whitehall, your silk slippers silent against floors that have witnessed the rise and fall of dynasties. The air shimmers with golden candlelight reflecting off portraits of queens whose beauty was legendary across Christendom. Their painted faces glow with an otherworldly pallor, skin white as fresh snow, lips red as blood, eyes that seem to follow your every movement with divine authority. You breathe deeply, expecting to fill your lungs with the essence of royal magnificence. Instead, your nostrils are assaulted by something far more sinister, a cloying sweetness that masks an underlying metallic tang, like copper pennies dissolved in rosewater. The reality hits you like a physical blow. Those luminous white faces in the portraits weren't painted with pigment alone, but with poison that seeped through royal skin day after day, year after year. Before we dive deeper into these forgotten truths that lie beneath the surface of history's most beautiful queens, take a moment to hit that like button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from today. It absolutely fascinates me that we're connected across continents and time zones, all drawn together by our shared desire to uncover the real stories behind the fairy tales we've been told. This isn't the sanitized version of royal beauty you've seen in Hollywood films or read in romance novels. This is the authentic world of Renaissance and medieval queens, where the pursuit of divine beauty became a form of slow suicide, where the very cosmetics that created their legendary appearances were methodically destroying them from the outside in. You've stepped into courts where beauty literally killed, where vanity trumped survival, and where the most powerful women on earth willingly poisoned themselves in pursuit of an impossible standard of perfection that would make modern toxicologists recoil in horror. The practice of using lead-based cosmetics in European royal courts wasn't an accident or an oversight. It was a deliberate, systematic approach to beauty that spanned centuries and claimed the lives of countless queens, duchesses, and noble ladies. From the court of Elizabeth I in 16th century England to the salons of 18th century French aristocracy, lead-based makeup became the gold standard of royal beauty, literally and figuratively transforming women into living sculptures of toxicity. The historical record is unambiguous about both the prevalence and the consequences of these practices. Court physicians from the period documented symptoms we now recognize as classic heavy metal poisoning: mood swings, memory loss, paranoia, and physical deterioration that courtiers attributed to the pressures of ruling rather than the cosmetics their queens applied religiously each morning. Medical treatises from the era, including works by Paracelsus and other Renaissance physicians, warned against the use of white lead in cosmetics, yet their warnings went unheeded in the face of fashion demands that equated pale skin with divine purity. The chemical composition of these deadly beauty products was deceptively simple. Venetian ceruse, the most popular formulation, combined white lead powder with vinegar to create a paste that dried to a ghostly white finish. Spanish white, another variant, mixed lead carbonate with bismuth to achieve an even more dramatic pallor. These weren't occasional applications for special events. They were daily rituals that built up layers of toxic metals directly on the skin, creating an ever-thickening mask that grew heavier and more poisonous with each passing day. Archaeological evidence from royal burial sites has confirmed what historical documents suggested. The remains of queens and noble ladies from this period contain lead levels that would be considered lethal by modern standards. Hair samples from Elizabeth I's wigs, preserved in museum collections, show lead concentrations hundreds of times higher than what would trigger immediate medical intervention today. The scale of lead cosmetic use in European courts defied every principle of health and safety that existed even in their own time. This wasn't ignorance. It was willful blindness in service to an aesthetic ideal that valued death over life, appearance over survival. Every major royal court from London to Vienna, from Madrid to St. Petersburg, became a laboratory for systematic self-poisoning disguised as beauty routine. At the English court of Elizabeth I, over 40 ladies-in-waiting applied fresh layers of Venetian ceruse each morning, not just to their faces but to their necks, arms, and décolletage. The process began before dawn in chambers that reeked of vinegar and metal, where servants mixed fresh batches of poison with the casual efficiency of bakers preparing daily bread. They could not look away as their mistresses transformed themselves into living death masks, layer by layer, day by day. The French court under the Bourbon monarchy elevated this practice to an art form that encompassed not just the queen, but dozens of duchesses, countesses, and court ladies who competed to achieve the most dramatic pallor. Marie Antoinette's court alone consumed enough white lead each month to poison a small city, applied with brushes made from exotic animal hair to achieve the perfect distribution of toxicity across royal skin. Spanish courts, influenced by their obsession with religious purity, declared that pale skin demonstrated divine favor and moral superiority. The whiter a lady's complexion, the closer she was believed to be to God himself. This theological justification turned lead poisoning into a form of religious devotion, where suffering through the effects of toxic cosmetics became evidence of spiritual purity rather than vanity-driven self-destruction. The German courts of the Holy Roman Empire established entire guilds dedicated to the preparation and application of lead-based cosmetics. Master cosmetic preparers held the same social status as court physicians. Their knowledge of toxic formulations passed down through generations of families who specialized in creating increasingly potent mixtures that could achieve ever more dramatic effects. The daily ritual of lead application followed protocols as rigid and ceremonial as religious services. Ladies-in-waiting would arrive in the queen's chambers hours before dawn, carrying silver boxes filled with powdered white lead that gleamed like fresh snow in the candlelight. They could not look away as these deadly preparations transformed living women into porcelain dolls whose beauty came at the cost of their sanity and their lives. The process began with the mixing ritual. Fresh white lead powder, imported at enormous expense from mines where workers died regularly from lead exposure, was combined with vinegar in precise ratios that had been perfected over generations of royal poisoning. The mixture was stirred with silver implements until it achieved the consistency of thick cream, ready to be painted onto skin that had been deliberately left unwashed to provide better adhesion for the toxic paste. Application required the steady hands of artists and the stomachs of executioners. Using brushes made from sable hair, servants would paint the lead mixture onto their mistress's face in thin, even layers, building up coverage that grew thicker with each pass. The queen was required to remain perfectly still during this process, breathing shallow breaths to avoid inhaling the metallic vapors that rose from the wet paint on her skin. The most horrifying aspect was the accumulation protocol. Rather than removing previous applications, fresh layers were painted directly over old ones, creating geological strata of poison that built up over weeks and months. Elizabeth III's face became so encrusted with lead-based cosmetics that courtiers reported hearing cracking sounds when she spoke or smiled, as if her very expressions were fracturing the toxic mask that had become her permanent face. The physical effects were immediate and escalating. Within hours of application, the lead began seeping through the skin into the bloodstream, causing the distinctive symptoms that court physicians documented with clinical precision. Headaches struck first, followed by nausea and dizziness that queens learned to hide behind fans and carefully controlled movements that minimized the risk of public collapse during state ceremonies. Memory problems appeared within days of beginning regular lead use. Queens would forget the names of longtime courtiers, lose track of conversations mid-sentence, and struggle to follow complex political discussions that had once been their specialty. Courtiers attributed these lapses to the burdens of rule, never suspecting that their sovereign's daily beauty routine was literally destroying her cognitive function. The psychological effects proved even more devastating than the physical ones. Lead poisoning causes paranoia, sudden rages, and emotional instability that transformed stable rulers into unpredictable tyrants whose moods could shift from benevolent to murderous without warning. They could not look away as their queens descended into madness that courtiers interpreted as divine inspiration or political cunning rather than heavy metal poisoning. The case of Countess Giulia Tofana represents the most chilling example of how lead cosmetics became tools of both beauty and murder in Renaissance Italy. Born into a family of alchemists in Palermo around 1620, Tofana discovered that the same white lead used in royal cosmetics could be refined into an odorless, tasteless poison that she marketed to wealthy women seeking to escape unwanted marriages through the convenient deaths of their husbands. Tofana's operation reveals the thin line between cosmetic enhancement and chemical warfare that characterized Renaissance beauty culture. Her workshops produced two distinct products: legitimate lead-based cosmetics for women who simply wanted to achieve fashionable pallor, and concentrated lead solutions disguised as cosmetics that could kill a grown man within days of ingestion. The manufacturing processes were identical. Only the concentration levels distinguished beauty products from murder weapons. The Countess established a network of clients that included some of the most powerful women in Italian society, from merchant wives seeking to inherit their husbands' fortunes to noble ladies trapped in political marriages they couldn't escape through conventional means. Her cosmetic laboratories became de facto assassination centers where beauty treatments and murder shared the same chemical foundations, the same application methods, and often the same victims. What makes Tofana's story particularly horrifying is how seamlessly her products integrated into existing beauty routines. Women who purchased her enhanced cosmetics would apply them to their own faces each morning, gradually poisoning themselves while simultaneously using the same substances to poison their husband's food or wine. The line between self-destruction and homicide became blurred beyond recognition in a culture where deadly chemicals were considered essential beauty aids. The investigation that eventually brought down Tofana's operation revealed the staggering scope of cosmetic poisoning in Renaissance Italy. Papal authorities discovered that she had supplied enhanced lead cosmetics to over 600 women across Italy, resulting in an estimated 600 deaths from what appeared to be natural causes, but were actually cases of systematic lead poisoning disguised as beauty treatments. Tofana's clients included Duchess Isabella de' Medici, who used the Countess's enhanced cosmetics for both personal beautification and the elimination of political rivals who threatened her family's power. The Duchess would invite enemies to intimate dinners where she appeared in full lead-white makeup while serving wine that had been enhanced with the same chemicals she wore on her face. Her guests died admiring her luminous complexion, never realizing that her beauty routine and their death sentences came from identical sources. The psychological profile of Tofana's operation reveals women trapped between impossible social expectations and deadly beauty standards who saw poison as their only escape from systems that valued their appearance over their lives. They couldn't stop using lead cosmetics because social survival required maintaining fashionable pallor, but they could redirect the same chemicals toward solving other problems that conventional solutions couldn't address. The trial transcripts from Tofana's case, preserved in Vatican archives, document the confessions of women who had been slowly poisoning themselves with cosmetics for years before discovering that the same substances could solve their marital problems. They described the relief of finally finding a purpose for their daily self-destruction, a way to transform their vanity-driven suicide into strategic elimination of the men who controlled their lives and deaths. The Countess herself maintained until her execution in 1659 that she was simply providing enhanced beauty products to women who wanted more dramatic results from their cosmetic routines. She argued that if society demanded that women poison themselves for beauty, she was merely offering more efficient methods for achieving the desired effects while solving other problems simultaneously. The social and psychological aftermath of widespread lead cosmetic use created a generation of European noble women who exhibited symptoms that modern medicine would immediately recognize as heavy metal poisoning, but that contemporary observers attributed to everything from divine inspiration to demonic possession. Court records from across Europe document the same patterns: increasingly erratic behavior among the highest-ranking ladies, mysterious illnesses that struck down queens in their prime, and a curious correlation between the most fashionable women and the highest rates of early death. The economic impact was equally devastating. European courts spent enormous sums importing white lead from mines that operated under conditions so dangerous that they were essentially death sentences for the workers who extracted the raw materials for royal beauty. The lead trade became one of the most profitable and deadly industries in Renaissance Europe, built entirely on the vanity of women who literally paid to poison themselves. Perhaps most disturbing was how the lead cosmetic industry adapted and evolved in response to growing awareness of its dangers. Rather than abandoning toxic formulations, manufacturers developed increasingly sophisticated methods for disguising the taste, smell, and immediate effects of lead poisoning. They created time-release formulations that delayed symptoms until the connection between cosmetics and illness became impossible to trace, allowing the industry to continue operating even as evidence of its dangers accumulated. An inventory discovered in the ruins of a Venetian cosmetics workshop, destroyed in a fire in 1687, reveals the industrial scale of this systematic poisoning. The facility contained over 3 tons of white lead powder, enough to provide daily cosmetic applications for every woman in Venice for an entire year. Production records showed that this single workshop supplied lead cosmetics to royal courts across Europe, creating a continent-wide network of deliberate self-poisoning disguised as beauty enhancement. The psychological mechanisms that sustained this system defy rational explanation. Generation after generation of intelligent, educated women watched their mothers, sisters, and friends die from mysterious illnesses that consistently struck down the most beautiful and fashionable ladies, while somehow never making the connection to the cosmetics they all shared. They could not look away from the evidence of their own destruction, yet they continued painting poison on their faces each morning with religious devotion to standards that demanded their deaths. The final irony of the lead cosmetic epidemic lies in its ultimate futility. The ghostly pallor that these women died to achieve was itself a symptom of the heavy metal poisoning caused by their beauty routines. They were literally dying to look like they were dying, pursuing an aesthetic ideal that was actually the physical manifestation of their own toxicity. The beauty they sought was the face of their own death, reflected back at them from mirrors that showed them exactly what they were becoming, beautiful corpses who happened to still be breathing. The queens who ruled through this chemical holocaust weren't monsters or fools. They were trapped in a system that offered them only one definition of acceptable female power, and that definition required their deaths. They ruled nations while slowly destroying themselves, commanded armies while their minds disintegrated, and shaped history while painting their own epitaphs on their faces each morning. In their pursuit of divine beauty, they discovered instead the very human truth that some prices are too high to pay, even for those who can afford to buy anything except their own survival.